May 1891. The air in Wisconsin is thick and humid. A plow strikes an obstacle with a dull, bony thud. The farmer expected a rock but unearthed a femur. It was longer than his own leg from hip to knee. When the skeleton was fully excavated, it measured 9 feet, or 2.74 meters, in length. The news became an instant sensation. Newspapers across the state screamed about the discovery. People flocked to see the bones of the prehistoric giant, and then they arrived, representatives from Washington, presumably from the Smithsonian Institution. They professionally removed the skeleton for careful study in the Capitol. The farmer proudly handed over his find, believing he was contributing to science. This skeleton was never seen again. All inquiries to the institution went unanswered. This story established a pattern that would be repeated hundreds of times: discovery, excitement, removal, disappearance. And this case wasn't an isolated incident. It was a system. This system gives rise to the 2 central questions of our investigation. The first, how could the Smithsonian Institution, created to increase and diffuse knowledge, systematically destroy the most sensational discoveries of the 19th century? Imagine a fire department. Instead of extinguishing a blaze, arriving at the scene with cans of gasoline. This is precisely the kind of historical arson the nation's leading scientific institution is accused of. The second question runs even deeper. Why do the legends of Native Americans, like the Paiute tribe, describe red-haired giants with double rows of teeth in detail, if modern anthropology claims such people never existed? These are 2 paradoxes that challenge the official historical narrative. Our search for answers will take us through old newspaper archives, museum vaults, and even alleged Supreme Court rulings. By the end of this video, your perspective on history will change. This isn't just a collection of mysteries, but a full-fledged investigation with conclusions. We will go beyond the simple question of whether giants existed. We'll explore why these stories emerged, why science rejected them, and why they have become incredibly popular again today. This is a journey from 19th-century archaeology to 21st-century mass psychology. We will see how newspaper hoaxes, real discoveries, scientific doctrines, and modern internet technology have woven together one of America's most enduring myths. We'll begin with what seems like a simple myth about giants, and end with an understanding of how official history is actually created and defended. Here is the roadmap for our investigation, centered on 3 key points. First, in 3 minutes, we will dive into the newspaper boom of the 19th century. You will see the true scale of the giant epidemic, documented in over 1,000 newspaper reports, a scale that official science prefers to ignore. Second, in 10 minutes, we will begin our central detective investigation, the case of Lovelock Cave. We will trace the mysterious disappearance of evidence for red-haired giants, connecting Native American legends to real artifacts. Third, in 18 minutes, we will reach the climax. We will uncover the truth about the scandalous Supreme Court decision that shook the internet and became the ultimate proof of a conspiracy for millions. 19th century newspapers are a portal to another reality. Ohio, 1872, a skeleton in copper armor. Arizona, 1891, a giant mummy in a canyon. At first glance, it seems simple. This was the era of yellow journalism, an epidemic of curiosities where stories of sea serpents were commonplace. One could easily dismiss it all as a thirst for sensationalism and close the case. But the reality was stark. We are not talking about a dozen articles, but more than 1,000 reports over 80 years. That's one new discovery every month, without a break, for an entire human lifetime. This is not an anomaly, it's a statistical phenomenon. It wasn't a local myth, but a nationwide occurrence. But it's not just the quantity that is shocking, it's who was behind these reports. Who were these people? Anonymous fabricators or real, verifiable individuals? The witnesses were most often farmers plowing their fields or construction workers digging foundations, ordinary down-to-earth people. But this picture shatters when you consider their social standing. These were not fringe elements, but landowners, town elders, and war veterans. In the small towns of the 19th century, reputation was everything. By publishing such a story, they were putting their good name on the line. For example, a report from Ohio in 1872 was certified by the signature of a local judge and 2 physicians, not a journalist. Trust in these stories was built not on bones, but on the reputations of the people involved. They did what honest citizens were supposed to do, report their incredible findings to scientists. And it was at this very moment that their amazing stories began to trail off, and the evidence began to vanish. If all this was so widely known, why don't we study it in history textbooks? The obvious explanation lies on the surface: the media environment of the 19th century. The lack of fact-checking and intense competition among newspapers turned any sensational story into early viral content, which was reprinted and embellished repeatedly. But this theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Similar anomalous details, such as copper armor or unusual skull structures, were described in reports from geographically and informationally isolated regions. People in Ohio in 1880 could not have known what a small newspaper in California was writing about. The reprinting theory is like a forest fire spreading from tree to tree. But here, we see dozens of separate fires igniting simultaneously in different parts of the forest. They must have had a common, independent source. So we have a mountain of newspaper clippings, 1,000 testimonies. We have established 3 facts: the phenomenon was widespread, it was backed by credible people, and the details in the reports were suspiciously consistent. But can we trust only century-old newspapers? For this to be more than just a myth, there must be physical evidence. We need to move from words to bodies. What was it about these skeletons that would compel an entire scientific institution to declare war on them? The answer lies in specific anatomical anomalies that modern genetics considers impossible. And the first, most famous, and most inexplicable of them, the one that transforms a merely tall person into a member of another race, is a double row of teeth. Modern genetics has no program for forming a second, complete dental arch. What does exist is called hyperdontia, extra teeth scattered chaotically. It's a pathology, not a system. At first glance, 19th-century eyewitnesses might have simply misidentified this condition. But this detail, a perfectly aligned double row of teeth, appears in dozens of reports from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and California. Doctors of that era knew how to distinguish a random anomaly from a foreign but consistent anatomy. This was not a descriptive error, it was the marker of a different biological species. And teeth were not the only mystery. These skeletons were often found not just in the ground, but in armor made of metal that, according to official history, Native Americans did not know how to work. Copper was indeed known to ancient American cultures like the Adena and Hopewell. They mined it and used cold hammering techniques to create ritual objects and ornaments. Archaeologists still find these artifacts, and there is no mystery in that. But the reality described in the reports was a stark contrast. These were not copper bracelets weighing a few grams, but full helmets, breastplates, and gauntlets weighing several pounds, requiring casting and hot forging technologies. And this armor was found specifically on skeletons of giant stature. The technological level of these artifacts was as anomalous as the anatomy of their owners, and like the bones, they met the same fate. They disappeared. But there is one place, one story, where all these threads, giant stature, red hair, and strange artifacts, are woven into a single knot. And that story has a name: Lovelock Cave. The legend of the Paiute tribe tells of the cited, cruel, red-haired, cannibalistic giants with whom their ancestors waged war for generations. The legend concludes with the last tribe of giants being cornered in a cave and burned alive. This was considered mere folklore until the early 20th century, when guano miners in Lovelock Cave, Nevada, began finding mummified remains of giant-sized people with preserved red hair. Ancient legend and modern archaeology collided at a single physical point. The coincidence was too precise to be random. It was the first time that newspaper reports and folklore received tangible confirmation. And this collision gave birth to one of the most dramatic stories of evidence suppression in the history of American archaeology. Imagine you are a miner in the early 20th century. You have just found something in a dusty cave that could overturn history. What do? Option A: report the find to a university, trusting in science. Option B: try to study it yourself, at the risk of being ridiculed. But the reality of the time presented a third, more sinister option. We already know how handing over finds to Washington ended, in their complete disappearance. The right path had become a dead end. The discoverers of Lovelock Cave chose a compromise. Some artifacts were sold to private collectors, while others were given to scientists. In the end, we were left with neither a complete collection nor official recognition. This tragic confusion is what allowed the most crucial evidence to be hidden. Let's venture into the cave itself and see what was found and what was lost. The air in the cave is dry and still, saturated with the dust of millennia. In 1911, 2 miners, David Pugh and James Hart, began excavating guano here, a valuable fertilizer from bat droppings. At a depth of 4 feet, Their shovels hit woven baskets and human bones. But when the first archaeologists from the University of California took over, a routine discovery transformed into a living legend. They found mummified bodies with remnants of red hair and jawbones significantly larger than human ones. The Paiute myth was becoming an archaeological fact. The artifacts were sent to museums, but the largest and most important skulls, the very ones that could have rewritten history, vanished. And the trail of their disappearance once again leads to the scientists who were supposed to preserve them. What remains of those findings today? Can you see the evidence with your own eyes? The Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, Nevada, does hold artifacts from the cave. For example, there is a sandal measuring 15 inches or 38 centimeters in length. This corresponds to a US size 23 shoe, which could only be worn by a person around 8 feet tall. But where are the skeletons themselves? Where are the skulls? Official reports claim they were either lost or their size was exaggerated. However, early 20th century photographs and the archaeologists' own notes describe remains measuring 8 and 9 feet tall. Today, all we have are a few strange objects and a gaping void on museum shelves where the key evidence should be. This emptiness is not accidental. It's time to name the prime suspect in this case. How can a giant skull from a museum collection simply be lost in the 20th century? At first glance, the explanation is simple: the chaos of early American archaeology. The lack of unified catalogs, fires, and the relocation of collections made the loss of an artifact a sad but plausible accident. But this theory crumbles under the weight of statistics. Why have thousands of ordinary Native American pottery shards and arrowheads been perfectly preserved in the same vaults, while unique giant skulls and anomalous armor have disappeared with remarkable consistency across the country? This wasn't negligence. It was a system designed to protect one single scientific theory. The name of this organization is the Smithsonian Institution, and they had a motive. We have gathered testimonies, examined the anatomy, and uncovered the tragic story of the cave. What is the link that ties it all together? The picture is clear. There are hundreds of newspaper reports, a specific, well-documented case in Lovelock, and the fact of systematic evidence disappearance. All that's left is to understand the core question of any investigation: the motive. Who benefits? Why would America's most respected scientific organization destroy its most sensational discoveries? The answer lies in the greatest scientific revolution of the 19th century. They weren't protecting history. They were protecting Darwin's strict, linear theory of evolution. And giants simply did not fit into that picture. To protect this narrative, they needed more than just a scientist. They needed a guardian. His name was Alois Hrdlicka, and he was the head anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution. On paper, his mission was noble: to transform archaeology from a hobby for amateurs into a rigorous science, weeding out fakes and dilettante conclusions. But this fight for scientific purity turned into an ideological purge. Any discovery that didn't fit his strict theory of the populating of the Americas via the Bering Strait was declared either a pathology or a forgery, and it was to be disposed of, so as not to confuse the public mind. This was not scientific objectivity, it was a doctrine, and a race of giants would have shattered it. Therefore, it had to be erased. In practice, this mechanism worked like clockwork. Imagine a local farmer beaming with pride, sending a massive jawbone with a double row of teeth to Washington. He awaits recognition, a contribution to history. A few months later, he receives a cold, standard letter. It states that the bones belong to an extinct bear or a human with a rare disease. A request to return the find for independent examination is met with a reply: the specimen was lost during relocation. The process was like breathing into a void, a loud inhale of hope from the discoverer, and a quiet exhale of a standard rejection from the institution. Dozens of such stories, documented in local archives, built the Smithsonian's reputation as a black hole for anomalous artifacts. Did the institution ever respond to these accusations? It did. And today, its official position sounds measured and authoritative. All stories of giants are hoaxes from the 19th century yellow press and fabrications by modern pseudoscientists. But there is a glaring hole in these denials. They never answer the main specific question: what happened to the dozens of skeletons and artifacts whose receipt is documented in their own archives? They deny the existence of giants, but do not comment on the accusations of destroying evidence. This is a classic straw man argument. And this deafening silence on specific cases is what has bred the conviction of their guilt. By the mid-20th century, the story of the giants had nearly faded away along with its witnesses. It seemed the case would remain unsolved. But in the late 1990s, a new tool emerged that changed everything: the internet. The digitization of old newspapers and the rise of early forums resurrected the legend with incredible force. What had once been scattered clippings in dusty archives became accessible to everyone. The story was picked up by internet sleuths. And they had something their predecessors lacked: a way to instantly consolidate all the clues in one place. Their work transformed an old American legend into a modern global phenomenon. And now we'll see exactly how they did it. In the early days of the internet, it all began nobly. Lone enthusiasts on forums simply scanned and uploaded old articles, archiving a lost history. But when over 1,000 dubious newspaper rumors from different states were gathered in one place, a cumulative effect occurred. Quantity triumphed over quality. The process is like the formation of a river delta. Each clipping was just a tiny grain of sand, but together they created an entirely new, massive landscape of digital evidence. This database, built on emotion rather than verification, became a weapon. And this weapon fell into the hands of a new, far more powerful machine for myth dissemination. The name of this machine is YouTube. Videos on this topic have garnered over 15 million views. That's more than the population of a country like the Netherlands. The secret to their success is simple. The algorithm doesn't seek truth, it seeks maximum engagement. Clickbait headlines, shocking thumbnails, and the narrative of lone truth seekers battling the Smithsonian system make for a perfect viral product. The algorithm sees high interest and begins promoting these videos to millions. It's not just creators making content, it's the system itself cultivating a monster. Like a wildfire, where a video is the spark and viewer interest is the dry tinder, the algorithm acts as the wind, fanning the flames until they engulf millions of minds. Thus, YouTube created a self-sustaining cycle of belief, an information bubble where millions of people desperately awaited their smoking gun. Demand creates supply. New forms of evidence came into play. Photographs of giant petrified bones that were actually well-known geological formations. Fake images created for Photoshop contests were passed off as real archaeological photos. In the digital world, a debunking always arrives too late. A fake photo gets 10,000 shares in an hour, while an article refuting it, which only hundreds will read, takes days to prepare. Research from MIT shows that false news spreads 6 times faster than the truth. This is an asymmetric information war, where evidence is needed not to find the truth, but to confirm a belief. And nothing confirmed that belief as powerfully as a news story that appeared in 2014. By this point, the army of internet sleuths was at its peak. They had a historical database of thousands of articles. They had platforms for mass distribution. They had an audience of millions convinced of their righteousness. They were missing just one thing: the final blow, an official document, a legal verdict that would once and for all confirm the Smithsonian's guilt. The tension reached its limit, and one morning they saw a headline that was too good to be true. U.S. Supreme Court orders Smithsonian to release classified information about a giant human remains cover-up. It was a moment of absolute triumph, or the greatest deception in the history of modern myths. On December 9, 2014, the story seemed to have reached its conclusion. The Supreme Court had issued a ruling forcing the Smithsonian to confess. The news, supposedly published by the American Institution of Alternative Archaeology, quoted a Smithsonian representative who spoke regretfully about destroying thousands of giant skeletons to protect Darwinism. As proof, a giant human femur, secretly removed from the institution by a curator, was mentioned. The news exploded online. In the first 48 hours, it garnered over 750,000 shares. But no one checked the source. It was a satirical news website, World News Daily Report, which explicitly stated in its disclaimer that its articles were fictional. The debunking didn't kill the theory, it made it indestructible. How could the exposure of an obvious fake not bury a theory, but make it stronger? This paradox defies logic. Fact-checkers immediately published refutations. Here is the source, it's satirical, the story is fabricated, case closed. But the psychological backfire effect kicked in. When deeply held beliefs are attacked with facts, people do not abandon them. They believe in them even more strongly. For supporters of the theory, the refutation was not proof of their error, but proof of an even deeper conspiracy. The Smithsonian had bribed the fact-checkers to discredit the truth. This mechanism works like tempering steel. The hammer blow of a refutation doesn't shatter the belief, but makes its structure harder. The theory had become invincible. Who was behind the creation of this fake story? Smithsonian agents trying to make all truth seekers look crazy? The reality was simpler and more cynical. It was business. Websites like World News Daily Report operate like factories, producing content with the highest probability of going viral. Their goal is not satire, but generating traffic to earn advertising revenue, where a single sensational story can bring in up to $10,000 a day. They didn't want to prove anything. They found an emotionally charged theory and created a news story that all its followers would dream of clicking. They weren't hiding the truth or fighting it. They turned people's belief into a commodity. They monetized hope. So all the pieces of the puzzle are on the table. The newspaper fever of the 19th century. The strange anomalies of double rows of teeth. The tragedy of Lovelock Cave. The unyielding doctrine of the Smithsonian Institution. The army of internet sleuths. And the viral fake about the Supreme Court. Each of these elements is not a random fact, but a gear in the vast mechanism of a myth's birth, life, and mutation. This story turned out to be more complex than the question, did giants exist or not? It's a question of how we create history, how we believe, and how we are deceived. We were searching for the bones of giants, but we found the anatomy of a modern myth. In the finale, we will bring this picture together. To understand the giant phenomenon, we must return to its origins. It is based on three elements. First, real discoveries. 19th century farmers did indeed find enormous bones in Native American mounds. But these were the remains not of giant humans, but of prehistoric megafauna, like mammoths and mastodons, often mixed with human skeletons. Newspaper reports frequently described a femur 4 feet long, a size that perfectly matches a mastodon's bone. In the absence of paleontological knowledge, eyewitnesses drew the most logical conclusion. The second element, anomalies. Descriptions of double rows of teeth could have been misinterpretations of post-mortem jaw deformations or simply journalistic fabrications. The third element, an epic story. The Paiute legend of red-haired giants in Lovelock Cave gave the myth historical depth. These three components created a perfect storm. Real finds generated rumors, newspapers turned rumors into sensations, and ancient legends transformed them into a saga. Thus, a mythology was born, one that was not a lie, but a product of its time. This folk mythology might have remained just that, folklore. But official science entered the fray, and its actions turned the legend into a conspiracy. In the early 20th century, the Smithsonian Institution and its lead anthropologist, Alois Hrdlicka, waged a war for scientific purity. Any finds from amateurs that didn't fit into their strict framework were declared fakes. Instead of explaining to the public why mammoth bones were not giant bones, they dismissed the findings, confiscated them for study, and then allowed them to disappear into vast archives. They publicly ridiculed the discoverers. Hrdlicka personally responded to letters, and his standard reply was brief, an obvious pathology, or a layman's error. This arrogance bred deep distrust. Scientific silence created an information drought. And public curiosity, like parched soil, was ready to absorb any water, even the murkiest conspiracy theories. Thus, a simple idea was born. If they deny everything so aggressively, they must have something to hide. In its quest to protect science, the institution single-handedly gave the giant myth a second, far more dangerous life. By the end of the 20th century, the story of giants was a local American legend, but the internet changed everything. The myth mutated. First, forums allowed enthusiasts to gather thousands of newspaper clippings, creating the illusion of an irrefutable database. Then, YouTube's algorithms turned this database into viral content, delivering it to millions worldwide. A myth that had been pieced together over 150 years was digitized and spread globally in less than a decade. But it lacked a catalyst. That catalyst was the fake news about the Supreme Court. It landed on perfectly prepared ground, becoming the official confirmation everyone had been waiting for. This fake story cemented the entire structure. We have witnessed not a story about bones, but a story about how information and disinformation live, mutate, and adapt. The newspaper hoaxes of the 19th century, the scientific arrogance of the 20th, and the viral technologies of the 21st have all woven together. Think about it. How often have you shared a news story without checking the source? We have followed the entire journey, from bones in Native American mounds to viral hoaxes on social media. All the facts are before you. Now, you must make a choice. There are two paths, two final verdicts. The first is conspiracy. This is for you if you believe there's no smoke without fire, that thousands of testimonies cannot be a simple mistake, and that the Smithsonian Institution did indeed destroy findings that shatter official history. The second is mythology. This is for you if you believe this is a cautionary tale about how imagination, multiplied by newspaper sensationalism, scientific arrogance, and modern technology, can create an incredibly resilient legend. Now that you know the whole story, what have you become? Write one word in the comments: conspiracy or mythology. Your choice is the final verdict in this case. It will show how many of us are ready to believe in a mystery and how many are ready to accept a complex truth.